Hey friends, hope you're doing well. Hope you got your coffee if you drink coffee. I got mine. Got it at a local coffee shop this morning. Absolutely beautiful day in Indiana. Been sleeping with the windows open for a few nights, getting down to 50, 52 degrees. Just beautiful. I love the fall in Indiana. But tomorrow would be Hank Williams' 100th birthday. 100. And that's kind of a big deal. I wanted to talk a little bit about Hank Williams Sr. And I was going to talk about this book a little bit here. It's Hank, it's by Mark Grabowski. It's a fun biography, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. But first off, what was the first time you remember hearing Hank Williams in your life? Tell me down below your earliest memories of hearing Hank Williams. My earliest was my grandfather played bluegrass music, and when I say bluegrass music, it was more like the Carter family. You know, it wasn't so much Bill Monroe, it was more like the Carter family. And he played a lot of other people's songs, and there were a lot of Hank Williams songs in there. And I didn't think about where songs came from. I think some part of me assumed he probably wrote them. I don't know why, but you're just a kid with an overactive imagination. And I also remember being in church way back, you know, as a little bitty kid and hearing I Saw the Light and being sung with all of these other old hymns. And one day later on realizing Hank Williams wrote that? What? You know, and how I didn't get that at all. But my earliest memories, I think, would be listening to my grandfather singing those songs, and I would hear them. You know, somebody would play them and all that, but I don't remember us having Hank Williams albums, but there were always other people singing Hank Williams songs throughout the record collections. Jerry Lee Lewis, George Jones, Loretta Lynn, Bob Dylan. You know, there's so many times I remember hearing people sing Hank Williams songs. The big one was Jerry Lee Lewis. I really loved some of his versions of those, Johnny Cash. But what's your early memories of that? I also, the first time I really went down the Hank Sr. rabbit hole was probably in my early to mid 20s. I had a lot of changes in my life that led to much better things for me. A little bit of depression, and I remember listening to Hank. I just bought a bunch of stuff. You could go to some thrift store and buy a Hank album for 50 cents. And I bought a bunch of them, you know, stuff with different versions of stuff or repackaged, and would sit and listen to stuff and just get depressed, you know, big time. It really resonated to me, which I think says a lot. We're talking about some kid in the 80s, you know, probably in the late 80s or whatever, early 90s, listening to Hank Sr. and it resonating big time. And I think there's a kid somewhere right now listening to Hank Sr. and it's resonating all of these years later. And for me, the only thing that I need from a singer, I think the most important quality, maybe the only important quality, is that when I listen to them, when I listen to that singer, I completely believe them. No matter what they're singing, it could be complete bull or whatever, but if they can make me believe it and I don't even doubt them, I can get lost in the song, and that's everything. They don't need to sing on key. Sometimes it helps if they don't sing on key. You know, they don't have to be acrobatic singers with big ranges and all that. Sometimes that makes it just way worse, and it annoys me. You know, but if it's someone who I absolutely believe it when I hear it, and it just sounds natural to my ear and to my heart, I get completely lost in it. And man, Hank's the epitome of that. The epitome. I was listening to a bunch of stuff yesterday, just thinking about Hank stuff, you know, and I'm listening, and there's just so many of those songs where his delivery, the ones I like the most are some of the like more demo type stuff, or stuff with just him and a guitar, and it's so intimate, and he's talking and it feels, or he's singing or doing recitation, and it just feels so immediate and part of that moment, and I believe him absolutely, where there's no doubts in my mind. That, what's that song, or what's the story? Can you make folks feel what you feel inside? Something like that. Hank Sr. could do that. And there's something immediate and timeless about it when I listen to him. And maybe it's because everything afterwards was built on top of Hank Williams. Like as far as singer-songwriter type stuff, just so much of that is just built right on top of that. Bob Dylan, when they're listening to Log Train, which is a song. Remember Peter Case was talking about how John Prine was obsessed with Log Train and wanted to write something like that. When you hear that, I can hear Dylan singing Ramona. Ramona, come closer, shut softly your watery eyes. You can hear that little waltz story song thing. I can hear that in Prine. I can hear that in so much stuff that came afterwards. And I don't know, it's hard to imagine music and story songs and singer-songwriter type stuff without Hank Sr. I'm sure music would have happened and evolved in some other way, but the way that it evolved, you just draw a straight line back to Hank. And imagine some kid in Georgiana, Alabama, just some small town Alabama with no money, working class parents or whatever, to do something, but to even dream of doing something to where they would be remembered 100 years later, where people would actually have celebrations, where some idiot like me would turn on a camera and talk about you 100 years later. I can't, talk about winning the lottery. And he didn't do something negative to make that happen. People do terrible things and become famous. It was a person who wrote songs and sang songs and became known for it. But I go back to this book here. One of the things that I read in here that stuck out to me, I never heard this. Hank Sr.'s grandfather was a Confederate soldier, and he got captured in Richmond, and he cut a deal. Instead of going to prison or something worse, he went ahead and agreed to join the Union and fought on behalf of the North, and gave away troop locations of, down south that he knew about. And when the war was over, he was discharged with full honors. He came back to Alabama and never spoke of it again. No one knew he was a turncoat, but Hank Sr.'s grandfather did that. I didn't know that. But this is a little bit about how Hank Williams was born, and I figured I'd share this with you. This is from Hank by Mark Rabowski. And his father's name was Lon, so it'll say Lon in here sometimes and it gets confusing. I apologize. It says, on September 17th, 1923, their next child, an undersized boy, was delivered by a doctor. Lon paid $35 to come and make a house call, assisted by either a black housekeeper, according to Lon's later recollection, or a neighbor named Ada Grace, according to Lily's. Lily was his mother. By one account, both mother and child were sick for the next few days, and Ada Grace stayed at the Williams place, tending to Irene and Lon. At the time, most of America was enjoying the roaring 20s, though in Alabama, the economy and the quality of life never seemed to roar. Still, the second child of Lon and Lily Williams arrived with high hopes. They named him after the Hebrew king Hiram I, who reigned in the Phoenician city of Tyre from 980 to 940 BC and built the first temple of the Israelites. They picked the name because they were members of the secret Masonic fraternal lodge. I didn't know that. Don't even know if that matters. But however, Hiram was in effect a non-person. In the poorer quarters of the South, the births of most children not born in hospitals were recorded only if parents registered a birth certificate with the local Bureau of Vital Statistics office. And Lily and Lon wouldn't get around to the paperwork until 1934, when Hiram was already 11 and they were living in Garland. His name was misspelled on the birth certificate as Hiriam, H-I-R-I-A-M. This anomaly would almost eerily be repeated when Elvis' middle name was misspelled on his tombstone. But anyway, not that it mattered. I went to Hiram King. He had by then already discarded that for something more chummy. He was unofficially, but eternally, Hank. King would also be dropped. High irony indeed when people took to calling him the king of country music. And that's Mark Grabowski from Hank. And so I just dropped the book. Wendell grabbed it and took off running through the yard with it. So I had to stop Wendell, getting from Wendell's my dog, but he wanted to read about Hank. But when Amy and I first got together, this was 25 years ago. We've been seeing each other for probably 6 months, and my buddy Todd and I, Todd Fox, we'd road tripped a lot already at that point, and we were going to do a road trip down through the South, and we let Amy come along with us, which was a big deal in our relationship. But we went down, and it was great. We had a really good time, and she just let Wendell in. But we went down through Memphis, we went down through Meridian, Mississippi, and went to Jimmy Rogers' grave. We ended up in New Orleans. I forget where else we went, but while we were gone, we went to Montgomery, Alabama, and we went to Hank Sr.'s grave. That was the first time I had ever been there, and it was pretty interesting. I think there's a picture, that, if I can find it, I'll put it up right here, of Amy and Todd. I took it with my Pentax K1000 film camera, and it's a little bit blurry, and I just liked it, the energy about it. I think Todd's taking a picture of Hank Williams' tombstone, and it just reminds me of that trip. The blur, all about it, just puts me in that place and time. But I remember there being, one, the stones were really big, and I'm going way out on a limb here. Maybe somebody can correct me. But wasn't there smaller stones to begin with, and Miss Audrey put up bigger ones? One for her and one for Hank later on. I don't remember one way or the other, but I thought there was some story about that. And there was AstroTurf all around the grave. And you quickly realize there's so many people that visit it that it was probably becoming a muddy mess. So they put this fake AstroTurf all around the gravesite, so when people sit around there, and there was a sign right there that said something to the effect of, this is a sacred place, please respect it. And you know that people were leaving whiskey bottles and coming out and partying at Hank's grave. And it's a weird thing, like Jim Morrison's grave, you know what that looks like. You've seen the pictures. And that's bad enough, but that's rock and roll. And then there's these country folks, country music for generations just wasn't on that tip. And, but the people that liked Hank were probably a lot rowdier. And anyway, I also remember on that trip, we wanted to go find Tee Tot's grave. It was a Rufus Payne. The man who taught Hank Williams how to play guitar was a black man who would come around. I guess he would just come around, and when Hank was around 8 years old or so, he would show him chords and all that stuff. And it's really vague, the history of it is, and who he was. Rufus Payne, I believe, was the name. And but he died in Montgomery in some kind of a poor person's hospital. Now, if you can imagine, in Montgomery, Alabama, this is probably in the 50s. A poor person's hospital would be bad enough, but a poor person's hospital for black folks, it was probably not a very pleasant way to go out. But he was buried in a cemetery, and I found out where the cemetery was, so we went over there. When we got there, we realized that it was a mass grave. It was the African American cemetery, and it was a mass grave. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of people buried in this cemetery, but none of them had markers. And so there's the man who taught Hank Williams how to play guitar. There's no marker on his grave. We just know that he's somewhere in there with all of these other people. And at some point, there was a historical marker put up in front of the cemetery, but that struck me big time because we learned it on the spot, and then we asked some people around the town. And since then, I've looked at some things online and learned a little bit more about it, but I just wanted to note that. And I'm going to post more stuff about Hank. I'm going to like repost some old stuff that I've published in the past. I want to just, as I think that people ought to see it, maybe this weekend can be like a Hank Williams weekend. I'm going to post something special tomorrow morning, Sunday morning, and I hope you guys will get up and watch that with me and enjoy that. And if you see anything else that I post about Hank, please click on it and share it with people. And tell me down below, what's your favorite Hank Sr. songs? You know, I like the really depressing stuff, the dark stuff. You know, the Tramp on the Street, even if he didn't write it. The stuff that I dig, like some of the gospel stuff, Alone and Forsaken, like some of the gospel stuff. I'm not a religious person at all. I've said that before, but I don't know why, but something about Hank singing gospel music, it resonates with me because I believe that he believed every bit of it, and I can feel that and hear that in his music. You can feel the heartbreak, and you know, maybe I feel that way about Jerry Lee Lewis too. I've said in the past, and people kind of sometimes get mad at me because maybe they don't understand what I'm saying. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I'd say I believe that like Hank and Jerry Lee believed every bit of it, and also realized that they couldn't live up to it. And so there's that longing in their voice. There's the distance between those two ideas that really makes for some haunting music, you know, some soulful stuff. And I mean, I should have said with the Tee Tot teaching him to play guitar, there is so much blues in Hank Williams' music, and maybe that's where a lot of that comes from. And also, I like to say, if you listen to any of the live stuff with Hank, anything that survived, he was always introduced as a folk singer, never a country singer. It was a folk singer, and that's what I think of this continuing tradition from Joe Hill to Woody Guthrie, even to Hank Williams. Bill Monroe was introduced, you know, they were a folk group. And I think Barry Mazer, who's much smarter than me about all of this stuff, was said about Jimmy Rogers that he didn't even know he was a country singer. He never heard of country music, you know, but now he's the father of country music. But so folk is, I like to use that word because it just has a longer lineage. And everything else just feels like it was created by marketing people in some boardroom. That's my personal opinion. You can believe whatever you want. But either way, I'm going to listen to some Hank this weekend. I'm going to try to share some more stuff. Tell me what your favorite Hank stuff is down below, and I'll see you down the road. And watch this video about Hank, and I'll see you down the road. Much love to you.